Karens don't always just scream in stores, harass neighbors, or throw public tantrums that end up as memes. Some take their theatrics so far that they cross into truly dangerous territory, and in rare, shocking cases, their antics don't just ruin someone else's day, they end up costing them their own lives. When people talk about Karens, they usually mean someone who throws a tantrum in a store, calls the cops for no reason, or harasses neighbors over petty grievances. But in Bedford, England, one Karen-level meltdown ended not just in embarrassment, but in death, destruction, and tragedy so shocking it rattled an entire community. Her name was Rena James, 43, and for years, neighbors said she had been locked in a bitter feud with the family living above her. The noise of their washing machine, the thud of early morning workouts, even the sound of children playing, things most people brush off, seemed to consume her. Instead of letting it go, she filed complaints to her landlord, to counselors, even to police, but nothing eased her anger. The more she stewed, the more the tension grew, until it exploded, literally. On July 4th, residents of Redwood Grove woke up to what would become one of the most horrific scenes in the block's history. At 9:30 in the morning, James armed herself with a hammer, smashed her way into her neighbor's flat, and poured petrol all over the surfaces. Then, in an act of sheer recklessness, she lit a naked flame. The explosion ripped through the building with a force so powerful it was heard half a mile away. Fire shot through the stairwells, windows blew out, and terrified residents leapt from upper floors to escape the inferno. Within minutes, the three-story block was engulfed, and before long it collapsed into smoldering rubble. But the person who triggered it all, Rena James herself, never made it out. A neighbor tried desperately to pull her to safety, but the flames overtook everything. Her body was later discovered in his flat, burned and broken, a grim end to the chaos she had unleashed. 3 others were rushed to hospital, including a firefighter who inhaled thick smoke and a resident left with leg injuries after leaping from the burning building. For survivors, the memory of that day is burned into their minds. The deafening blast, the walls shaking, the frantic screams as people clawed their way to safety. At the inquest, the coroner called her death a misadventure. But to many, it felt more like the final act of a Karen crusade gone horrifically wrong. What started with petty complaints over noise spiraled into a fiery act of vengeance that ended her life and destroyed dozens of others' homes. Neighbors who once rolled their eyes at her constant grievances now shudder at the memory. The woman who couldn't stand the sound of kids playing upstairs or a washing machine running at dawn ultimately went out in the most destructive way imaginable, by setting her entire block ablaze and perishing in the very inferno she created. This wasn't just another Karen incident caught on camera or ridiculed online. This was the deadly extreme of what happens when entitlement, obsession, and rage mix together with fire and gasoline. And so, Rena James's story now sits among the most horrific ways Karens have met their end. Not with a quiet fade, but with a bang so loud it shook an entire town, leaving a legacy of ash, rubble, and a cautionary tale that won't soon be forgotten. It was supposed to be one of those wholesome, picture-perfect mornings at a Florida elementary school, a kindergarten graduation where tiny kids dressed in paper caps beam proudly at their parents, and families gather to celebrate the milestone of moving up from crayons to cursive. Parents had their phones out, grandmas had tissues in their hands, and teachers tried their best to keep the event running smoothly. But instead of a simple, joyful ceremony, what unfolded in that auditorium could have been ripped straight from a reality TV reunion brawl. And at the center of it all, a full-blown Karen meltdown that escalated so wildly, it didn't just ruin the mood, it turned dangerous. The trouble began with something so small it was almost laughable. Seating. Yes, seats. A handful of folding chairs lined up for parents and family members to watch their little ones walk across the stage, but apparently one white woman, already giving off the stiff posture and tight-lipped energy of someone ready to pop, decided that she, and only she, had a rightful claim to a particular chair. That was her hill to die on. Seated nearby was a black mother, holding her young child, just trying to enjoy her kid's moment like everyone else, but Karen couldn't stand it. Instead of brushing it off or asking politely, she began fussing loudly, her voice cutting through the sweet background chatter of kids giggling and parents clapping. What should have been an innocent dispute about who sat where quickly turned into a public tirade. Witnesses say the woman's tone was sharp, venomous, and laced with entitlement. She leaned in, pointing her finger, her words dripping with disdain as she berated the black mother, loud enough for everyone within a 10-foot radius to hear. People shifted uncomfortably. Teachers tried to intervene, but Karen wasn't backing down. She had decided that this was her stage now, and then came the moment where things went from embarrassing to downright dangerous. With her child still in her arms, the woman lunged. Yes, she actually threw hands while holding her baby, swinging and shoving at the black mother as if this kindergarten graduation had turned into an underground fight club. Gasps rang out from the crowd. Children screamed. One father, who happened to be standing nearby, nearly got caught in the scuffle as Karen flailed recklessly, putting his safety in jeopardy. In a split second, what started as words nearly turned into someone being seriously hurt. The black mother, clutching her child, tried to shield herself while Karen continued to press forward. She could have dropped that baby, one shocked parent was heard saying. And worse, her erratic movements sent a row of chairs toppling backward, almost striking a black man who had been recording the ceremony on his phone. Witnesses say if he hadn't stepped back quickly, he could have been hit in the head, trampled, or worse. Karen's outburst wasn't just rude. It put lives at risk in a room full of families and little kids. By this point, chaos had taken over. Teachers rushed to pull the women apart, children were crying, and the whole celebration looked more like a scene from a viral fight video than a school milestone. Parents yelled for someone to call the police, and within minutes, officers were on the scene, trying to de-escalate the madness. Even then, Karen reportedly kept flapping her gums, still furious, still insisting she was the victim in the story she had written in her head. Instead of celebrating the kids, people were left talking about that crazy lady who decided to throw a tantrum and nearly turned a school event into a tragedy. One witness summed it up best. She was reckless. She didn't care who got hurt. She had her own baby in her arms, and she still decided to fight. She put that child in danger. She put the other mom in danger. She almost knocked into that man behind her. It could have ended way worse. And that's the real kicker. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about control, entitlement, and a woman so blinded by her own self-righteousness that she couldn't see the chaos she was creating around her. She risked lives, embarrassed herself in front of an entire community, and scarred what should have been a milestone memory for dozens of families, all because she couldn't let go of a chair at a kindergarten graduation. When the cops finally diffused the situation, the room was left in stunned silence. Parents whispered, kids asked questions no one wanted to answer, and the memory of that day became etched not for the children's achievements, but for the shocking display of rage from one woman who simply could not control herself. And so, what should have been a sweet send-off for Florida kindergartners will now forever be remembered as the day Karen showed her whole tale and nearly turned a graduation into a crime scene. This Karen might not have lost her life, but she certainly put another man's life at risk with her tantrums. It was late at night, the kind of quiet evening when most people just want to head home, kick off their shoes, and settle into peace. Real estate developer DeMichael Jenkins had just returned to his house, a home he had worked hard for, a home he shared with his wife, a home where he should have felt safe. But that night, instead of a calm arrival, he found himself at the center of a scene straight out of a nightmare. As Jenkins pulled up, headlights fading, he noticed movement at his front door. A white woman with her 2 children in tow was frantically pressing his doorbell, pounding on the door like she was fleeing some unseen danger. His wife had already stepped forward, answering the door with confusion written across her face. Jenkins, being the kind of man who doesn't ignore someone in distress, approached carefully, asking the question anyone decent would ask, "Do you need help?" But instead of a thank you, instead of relief, what came next was pure chaos. The woman's eyes widened as though she had just seen a ghost, or more accurately, the villain she had invented in her own mind. Without hesitation, she turned on him, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. She didn't see a neighbor. She didn't see a husband coming home. She didn't see the owner of the very house she was pounding on. No, what she claimed to see was a stranger, a threat, someone who didn't belong. "You don't live here?" she allegedly spat, her voice echoing through the night. And then came the scream, sharp, panicked, and deliberately loud enough to pierce the silence and draw attention. "Help! Help!" she cried, weaponizing fear against a black man standing in front of his own home. In that split second, Jenkins' life was put in danger, not from anything he had done, but from the lies spilling out of this woman's mouth. History has shown us how quickly things can spiral when a black man is falsely accused. All it takes is one neighbor calling the police, one trigger-happy officer arriving on the scene, one misunderstanding, and suddenly what was supposed to be a quiet night at home could turn into tragedy. Jenkins knew it, his wife knew it, and yet this woman either didn't care or didn't think. Jenkins's wife immediately tried to defuse the situation, stepping in with calm but firm words explaining that yes, this was their home. Yes, this was her husband, and no, he was not some intruder. But the woman was already lost in her own panic-fueled performance. Soon, her husband arrived, confusion plastered across his face. Now Jenkins and his wife had to do the unthinkable. Prove to strangers that they were not a danger in their own space. Imagine that, being forced to justify your very presence inside the home you bought, lived in, and loved. Your wife is mistaken, Jenkins and his wife explained. We live here. This is our house. I am not a threat to her. But even as they laid it out plain as day, the damage had already been done. The implication was there, loud and clear. A black man's existence in his own neighborhood was somehow suspicious. His presence alone had been enough to trigger accusations that could have cost him everything. Social media, however, wasn't having it. Once word of the encounter got out, people unleashed a tidal wave of backlash. They dragged the woman across every platform, holding her accountable for the reckless scene she created. And the criticism cut deep. So deep, in fact, that the woman herself went online in a tearful Facebook Live, her mascara running, her voice trembling as she attempted to apologize. But even her apology came wrapped in excuses. Between sobs, she insisted she hadn't profiled Jenkins, that she hadn't meant harm, that she hadn't intended to make it about race. Yet her actions spoke louder than her shaky words. She hadn't asked questions. She hadn't paused to consider the truth. She had gone straight to the dangerous accusation that a black man didn't belong where he was, that his very presence was a threat. The internet saw right through it. Commenters pointed out the obvious. If Jenkins had been white, would she have screamed for help? If Jenkins had been white, would she have accused him of not belonging? If Jenkins had been white, would his wife have had to explain, like a defense attorney presenting evidence, that no crime was happening here? The answer was clear. And that's what makes this incident so chilling. It wasn't just an argument at a front door. It was a textbook example of how quickly black lives can be put at risk by false accusations and weaponized fear. Jenkins did nothing wrong. He was simply returning home. Yet in the blink of an eye, his safety, his dignity, even his life hung in the balance because someone decided to scream instead of think. The apology may have been public, but the damage was private, personal, and lasting. Jenkins and his wife were left with the knowledge that, in their own neighborhood, at their own front door, they weren't seen as homeowners or neighbors first. They were seen as suspects, and all it took was one woman's baseless fear to turn a peaceful night into a potentially deadly confrontation. For Jasmine Thomas, it was supposed to be just another day at work, a job she had been faithfully doing for nearly a year. She drove down Bellerive Drive in Aiken, South Carolina, on her way to care for a hospice patient, the father of Josh Herring. Jasmine wasn't there for drama or trouble. She was there to do what she always did, provide comfort, compassion, and care to a family in need. But what should have been a quiet start to her shift turned into a terrifying ordeal that she'll likely never forget. As she pulled up to the familiar home, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The neighborhood was calm, the kind of place where you'd expect to hear birds chirping or see kids riding bikes. But that peace shattered in an instant. Out of nowhere, a white man stormed up to her car, his fists balled and his face twisted with anger. He didn't walk, he charged. And before Jasmine could even process what was happening, he was at her driver's side window, pounding on the glass like he was trying to break it down. The sudden violence jolted her. Her heart raced as the thuds of his fists echoed through her car. Unsure of what to do, she cracked the window, maybe thinking she could calm him down, maybe hoping he just wanted to speak. But the second the glass lowered, his rage exploded. As seen in the TikTok video Jasmine later posted, the man swung at her, his arm darting through the gap in the window, fists coming frighteningly close to her face. What happened next was pure chaos. Jasmine tried to open her door, perhaps to step out and defend herself, perhaps to escape, but the man wasn't having it. The police report later confirmed what the video showed. He grabbed her door and began slamming it against her over and over again, the heavy metal crushing into her body as she struggled to keep her footing. The sound of the door clanging shut, her cries of protest, and his shouts filled the air in a disturbing display of violence. "You don't belong here!" he screamed, his voice sharp, venomous, and dripping with hatred. Those 4 words weren't just an insult. They were a declaration that in his eyes, Jasmine, a black woman doing her job, had no right to exist in that space. And he didn't stop there. Between his wild swings and slamming the door, he spewed slurs at her, calling her out of her name, even hurling the word "bitch" with such force it cut through the chaos like a knife. The irony was staggering. Jasmine did belong there. She had been caring for the family's father for a year, showing up day after day with professionalism and compassion. She was a trusted caregiver, a steady presence in a household facing loss and grief. Yet, in that moment, all of that meant nothing to him. In his eyes, she was just someone to attack, someone to demean, someone to try to erase with fists and fury, and the danger was very real. Every time he slammed that door into her, every time he swung his fists, he wasn't just trying to intimidate, he was trying to hurt her. He didn't care about her safety, didn't care that she was there to work, didn't even care that his actions were being filmed. His rage had completely consumed him. Thankfully, the video evidence didn't lie. Jasmine's TikTok captured the assault in shocking detail, showing the world exactly what she had endured. Viewers were outraged, horrified that something like this could happen to a woman simply arriving at her job. The comments poured in, demanding accountability, demanding justice, and justice did come, at least in part. The man was arrested and charged with third-degree assault, a small but significant acknowledgement that his behavior wasn't just anger or a misunderstanding. It was violence. It was hate. It was an attack that could have ended far worse. For Jasmine, though, the scars go beyond the physical. The humiliation of being told she didn't belong, the fear of having a stranger's fists come at her, the trauma of being crushed by her own car door. It's something that lingers long after the headlines fade. She wasn't just attacked. She was dehumanized in broad daylight, in a neighborhood where she had every right to be. Her story is more than just a viral TikTok clip. It's a chilling reminder of how quickly everyday moments can turn dangerous when bias and rage collide. It's proof of how fragile safety can feel when someone decides to weaponize hate. And it's a testament to Jasmine's resilience that she had the courage not only to survive the assault, but also to share it with the world, ensuring that what happened to her would not be buried in silence. In Ocala, Florida, residents say one woman turned their neighborhood into a nightmare. Her name, Susan Lawrence. And if you ask the families who lived near her, they'll tell you she was less of a neighbor and more of a tormentor. For reasons nobody could quite figure out, Lawrence seemed to have made it her personal mission to harass the children in the area. The very sound of kids laughing and playing in the street, something most would call the heartbeat of a community, was like nails on a chalkboard to her. Day after day, parents say she lashed out. If children rode their bikes down the block, Lawrence would come storming out of her home, hurling insults their way. If a ball bounced too close to her yard, she'd respond not with patience but with rage, shouting, flicking the kids off, and spewing words no child should ever hear. What should have been innocent summer evenings filled with chalk drawings and jump rope turned instead into a constant cycle of intimidation. Residents whispered about her behavior, calling her the Karen of the block because she just couldn't leave the children alone. But things didn't stop at yelling and middle fingers. Neighbors alleged that Lawrence escalated her tantrums by throwing objects toward the children, anything to make her anger felt. For the kids, playtime came with fear. Parents had to warn their little ones to stay alert, to steer clear of her apartment, to understand that some adults simply didn't see them as children at all, but as targets for misplaced hate. And then came the day everything boiled over. The day her behavior claimed a life. Ajike A.J. Owens, a 35-year-old black mother of 4, was no stranger to Lawrence's harassment. Her children, like many others in the neighborhood, had endured the shouting, the insults, the flicked-off gestures. But when reports came that Lawrence had crossed yet another line, allegedly throwing objects at Owens' kids and lacing her fury with racial slurs, Owens had had enough. Like any protective mother would, she walked over to confront the woman face to face. Not to fight, not to threaten, just to stand up for her children and demand respect. But what should have been a tense conversation across a doorway turned into something unthinkable. Behind the front door of her apartment, Susan Lawrence armed herself with a gun. As Owens approached, seeking answers and accountability, Lawrence fired through the closed door. The bullet struck Ajik, fatally wounding her right outside the home her children had grown up fearing. In one violent act, a mother's life was stolen. 4 children were left without their mom, and an entire community was shattered. The tragedy sent shockwaves far beyond Ocala. To neighbors, it wasn't just about one fatal moment. It was the culmination of months of unchecked harassment. To them, it felt inevitable, like everyone had been watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. powerless to stop it. Owens's death became the grand finale of Lawrence's tirade, the final, irreversible chapter in a story that never should have been written. And now, Lawrence is facing criminal charges. Authorities, under pressure from a grieving community and national outrage, moved to hold her accountable. But the damage has already been done. A mother's life cannot be restored. 4 children are left to grow up with the trauma of losing their protector in the very neighborhood where they should have felt safe. Residents still describe Lawrence in the same way they did before. A woman who had it out for the kids, who couldn't tolerate joy, who turned play into danger. But now, her name is forever tied to something darker. She isn't just the woman who yelled at children in the street. She's the woman accused of taking Ajika Owens' life. The story has become bigger than Ocala. It's a flashpoint in the ongoing conversation about race, safety, and the weaponization of fear. To many, it's clear that if the roles had been reversed, if Owens had been the one behind that door, the narrative would have looked very different. But in this case, what the community is left with is grief, anger, and a demand for justice. Ajik Owens didn't go to that apartment with a weapon. She went as a mother, standing up for her kids. And for that, she paid the ultimate price. What started as petty harassment, a woman flicking off children for daring to laugh too loudly, spiraled into a deadly confrontation that ripped a family apart. And now, instead of hearing kids playing freely in the street, neighbors hear silence, broken only by the memory of what happened when one woman's hate turned fatal.